And welcome to this morning's edition of Community Conversations. This is John Quinlan. As many of you know, we're engaging in a very special project. Over the course of these last couple of days, we've had a chance to be in conversation with the four challengers for the Madison mayor's race. Yesterday, we had a chance to be in conversation with Mo Cheeks and then Toriana Pettaway. And then this morning, in just a moment, we're going to be getting into conversation with Raj Shukla, and then coming up at the 8 o'clock hour, Satya Rhodes Conway. So, exciting morning, and what we're trying to do here essentially is be engaged in a way that maybe goes beyond the constraints of the debate format where people have a minute or two sometimes to respond. And we really, what we want to emphasize is the life stories of the people that we're going to be talking to. What motivates them to run for office, what skills and experiences they'll be bringing to bear in that light. So with all of that in mind, I want to extend a warm welcome to our first guest, Raj Shukla.
Thanks so much, John.
Well, thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
I am going to be doing some engineering here, so I'm just going to kind of give you an open opportunity just to explain. So what brought you down this path? What made you decide to run for mayor this time?
Sure. Well, I thank you for having me on. Thank you to all those that are awake and listening this morning and engaged in the conversation we're having across the city about the future, not just the city, across the region, about the future that we want for ourselves. I got into this race because I was feeling, I think, what a lot of us have been feeling over the last couple of years in particular. Every one of us is being called by the moment that we're in, by the political moment that we're in, the ecological moment, the economic moment, to do more, to bring people together in our society and address some of the big challenges ahead of us. And there are big challenges. We are grappling with what feels like growing inequities across our society. We have a federal government and at least 2/3 of the state government that seems openly hostile to the values of this community. And we have the specter of climate change. We've seen that it is a reality that is impacting our lives right now, that it will only grow in its impact going forward, and that we as a people need to summon the courage, the creativity, the ambition, the compassion to take on those challenges head on and do it in a way that brings everyone forward together. I come to this as one of two candidates in this race with executive experience. I run an organization. The other candidate's Paul Soglin, and
That's the River Alliance, a statewide organization.
That's right. It's a statewide water policy group. It's been around 25 years, and I've had the honor and privilege of leading a talented team of professionals, of setting a vision for an organization in a very difficult moment for conservationists, certainly, and I think for progressive thinkers of all stripes, and for making very difficult decisions, difficult and necessary decisions that you have to make when your priorities and when your budgets collide. And we in this community have some very difficult decisions that we'll have to make to make sure that, housing is affordable for everyone, to make sure that our transit system works for everyone, and to make sure that we address these gaping inequalities, inequities along racial and economic lines that persist in our community. And I am offering myself as someone who has both the experience and the creativity and the vision to help this community get past some of those challenges. We've offered what I call my green growth agenda. And this is a comprehensive set of policies and programs to make sure that we continue to grow economically as a community, and that we do so in a way that's environmentally responsible and in a way that is true to our commitment to social and racial equity.
All right. Well, we'll have a chance to parse all of that out in a minute, but I just want to pick up on one of the things you talked about. Sometimes I think there's a debate about folks who are dealing with the Common Council when we deal with national issues or worldwide issues or other things. Why are those things relevant to the here and now? But you're talking about global climate change. And a couple of thoughts occur to me. at a time when the federal government is kind of is not only backing away from its commitment to do something about global climate change, it's actually in a lot of ways, it's been obstructionist. It's been getting in the way, and so part of the response at the level of state and local government has been to counter that. So I would imagine that's a potentially powerful role that you have at the city. The other thing I think about, in about 3 weeks, I'm going to be going to New York to the floor of the General Assembly. It's an annual meeting called Members Day that a group called the United Nations Association, where I've been a local and national leader, meets. The most powerful thing about that day is that in this room of 1,000 people, half of them are high school and college age. And on global climate change, they don't parse words. They just say, your generation is handing off to us a world that is deeply troubled. We need you to do something, and not to pontificate about it, not to have endless meetings about it, but to do something now, especially as a father of 3 children. Let's start there. How much of your motivation in running for office and trying to make a difference is grounded in the future of your children?
Well, of course, and I think any parent could say that. So much of what you do and what you think about every day is inspired by that look in a kid's eye in the morning when you see him. So of course I'm no different in that respect. But my interest in this became, it wasn't my kids that inspired me to get involved on climate change. I actually, in 2005, right as my wife and I moved to Madison, Hurricane Katrina had hit New Orleans, and I had the opportunity to go down with the Red Cross and spent about 3 weeks there delivering meals, delivering fresh water to folks who were devastated. Not just devastated by this storm, but devastated by the inaction of their government, the federal government in particular. The response wasn't a response. The response was to do nothing for too long. And, this isn't just a global issue, and I'm not suggesting you were saying that, but
I think the city has a responsibility to take on global issues.
We saw over the last summer what climate change looks like at the local level.
Right.
Here it's flooding, but there's another side to this. One of the largest natural killers in Dane County is heat stroke.
Yeah.
Heat stroke. So in a warming world, when people need things like air conditioning, especially those who don't have a lot of means, and especially those who are older and whose health is compromised, that's what climate change looks like. That's
Absolutely.
what a warming world looks like. So it is our responsibility to take on this challenge, not because we think we alone in Madison are going to somehow shift the entire world's climate, but we alone in Madison are absolutely responsible for doing our part to change course. Because you're right. When I talk to young people, they are hopeful, they are smart, they are very creative, and they are absolutely disappointed by the political system as it exists today. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
We did a forum last night at Oakwood Village.
Sure.
300 people showed up. It was an inspiring event. And 2 of my opponents spent a good chunk of the time trying to cast blame on one another, or try and claim credit for disaster relief. Mm-hmm. And it seems like kind of a small, petty way to do our politics. Yeah. We spend more time looking at the past and trying to, get our badges from our good deeds instead of thinking about the future and some very, very serious issues that we're dealing with. And I think that young people see that and are kind of like, more of that, really?
Right.
We have bigger things to think about, and more important things to think about than your ego or your or your resume.
Well, Raj, so again, just to be clear, no, I think that when the city council or when the mayor relates what's happening here in Madison to the larger world, that's a strength of our community. We have countless NGOs that are based here in Madison. I know through the United Nations Association, there are probably like 12 groups that work in East Africa and micro development and AIDS relief and other things, but they don't necessarily always connect with each other. So part of what I enjoy doing is connecting folks in Madison with each other that are doing this work in the larger world. The University of Wisconsin has more foreign students, I think, than any other university, with possibly the exception of Harvard. I mean, the world flows through our community, and in many ways, it flows through the mayor's office. So no, it's a really exciting opportunity. But what I want to do,
jump in just
absolutely,
quickly
go ahead.
And I think the flip side of what you just said, and they're related here, obviously, is that our community impacts the world.
Absolutely.
You know, the work that we did on the Sustainable Madison Committee, and I'm the chair of that committee. I have been for 4 years. And in that time, we have actually taken it upon ourselves, and this is unusual for an advisory committee. We've taken it upon ourselves to recognize the gravity of the situation we're dealing with. And we largely deal with climate change and energy issues. And we've written legislation, built coalitions on council, enacted a resolution to commit the city to the most aggressive climate change goals in the state, with other communities since following our lead. And we did that because volunteers who cared about the issue saw that the council and the mayor weren't doing enough.
Yeah.
And we took it upon ourselves to help them do their jobs better. And to their credit, they listened to us. Now, part of that is because we kept bringing people.
Yeah.
Just more and more people kept showing up, and it wasn't the same old folks who were attending common council meetings. It was young people, it was seniors, it was business people, it was activists. It was an entirely new group of people who were suddenly demanding that the city adhere to its aspirations. And that is what I hope this campaign can be about, that we don't have to rely on the way things have been done and the personalities that have been here for years and the same old ideas and the same old people. We can, in fact, get involved in our political process, summon all our creativity and courage and compassion, and work together to make a better way forward. And that is what I intend to do. That's what a lot of people seem to be telling us, given the response that we're getting to our campaign. And that's what I'm looking forward to helping this community do as mayor.
I mean, this is a politically engaged town. People in other cities may not have as much attention to detail about policy and other things. But as perhaps, what I'm trying to say is we are really engaged. We are concerned about the details and other things. But I think one of the other exciting aspects of this campaign, as I've seen you and others in these public debates, is there really is this new energy. I don't think we've had a race like this before in the 40 years I've been in Madison that has so many actively engaged people. And you each have your differences, and you're fully welcome to help us parse those out as the hour goes by, including your differences with the incumbent. But each one of you is deeply committed. Just the very process of the debate is moving this community forward, opening new doors, I think, in ways that haven't happened. But one aspect of that is the history-making nature that each of the four of you as challengers could possibly have. We would have either the first African-American mayor, the first openly lesbian person, or in your case, the first American of Indian descent who would serve in that role. And again, we're going to have lots of time to elaborate on some of the other things, but I do want to bring into the conversation a good friend. Pardeep, are you there? Hey, Pardeep, just hang on the line. I think you're probably hearing me. I may have to find a low-tech way to bring you in here. But let's just both of us reflect on that. And just introduce Pardeep, because I think we will have a way to bring him into the conversation in just a moment. Pardeep is someone who is a community organizer in Milwaukee, and I do want to bring in some of your experiences there. I think sometimes Milwaukee and Madison could be 1,000 miles away, but I think we have a lot of lessons to learn from each other in terms of things that happen on the ground in both communities. I think you're uniquely, in a position to be able to address that. I was talking to Pardeep at the Evers inaugural, and he was looking around the room, seeing other folks from Indian American communities who were there. And I guess what we were both remarking on is the enormous promise that there is. There's a mayor in Middleton from the Punjab, I believe, who's been in town for 30 years, making amazing contributions. There are people throughout the state. There are leaders like Pardeep, who now is leading on a national level ways to transform trauma in community settings into something better. His father having died in the massacre at the Sikh temple several years ago. And now he's aligning with a white supremacist, a former white supremacist who founded the very hate group that killed his father in ways that are transforming those experiences. So I am really hopeful that we'll find a way to bring him in here. But he and I talked about, as I think I told you, my mother lived in North India, in Kanpur, in Uttar Pradesh, for 4 years. That changed her life. And throughout her life, she continued to reach out, support young artists there, working with friends. India is probably one of the most pluralistic expressions of democracy in the entire world. So setting the stage in all of that way, what is the significance of you, if you are elected, and serving as one of the first Indian American mayors of a large American city?
Well, I think probably like many people that are in a position where they learn that, and this is true, you just sort of learn that this is potentially a history-making race. It wasn't something that I had set out to do. It wasn't something that I was actively thinking about when we started, but it is. It's less about what I think the impact is going to be. I don't know that I can calculate the impact quite yet, but I'll tell you what it means from I can tell you what sort of brought it here. My parents came to this country in the 60s, and my mother not speaking any English, my father a student at the University of Illinois, no family, no real connections to anybody here. And they built a community, first with other immigrants from India, many of whom spoke a different language and worshipped a different god, ate different food. But they managed to build a community around themselves, partly as a survival mechanism, partly to find companionship, partly to make a place in this country that was so new to them. One of the things that they instilled in me as a young kid watching how they did this, first with the Indian immigrant community and then with the community that I grew up in New Berlin, Catholic community, suburban Milwaukee.
You would enter a room and you would be the only person who looks like you in that room. And that's got to really inform your.
It's still the case.
Yeah.
And that's what they taught me, is that you can't afford, and it's not really constructive to do anything but try and welcome others into your life and into the conversation and into whatever good work you're trying to do. I've grown up believing in the power of community, believing in bringing people together, because I've seen it work. I've seen my parents build a life for their children here. My own professional life is built around bringing groups of people together to take on very difficult challenges. And we've done that successfully, and it is because of the diversity of those communities. It is because of the new ideas, because of the commitment to working together that we make progress. And that is something that has informed my life, and it is something that it will certainly inform my term.
Absolutely. So, Pardeep, I'm going to try to bring you in. You're on the speakerphone here. I want to bring you in just briefly. You've had a chance to hear some of what Raj has said in terms of his essentially, heritage of an immigrant family, in this case coming from South Asia, something that you share. Are there ways that you can relate to what the significance is now as more Indian Americans come into the leadership circles in Wisconsin? I think the other thing that, as Raj is speaking just now, it reminds me a lot of how you've spoken about who your parents are and were, and how that really informs who you are today. Are there aspects of that conversation that you can identify with?
Hey, John, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead. Did you hear the question?
Okay. I did hear the question, yep. So thank you for having me on. It's good to be on with Raj. I want to congratulate Raj on his mayoral run.
Thank you.
When we talk about pioneering, and definitely I think Indian Americans are definitely on the pioneering front of a lot of different political and policy issues within the United States. As of right now, the Indian diaspora is the largest growing diaspora in the world, and in the United States, it's the second fastest growing immigrant group after Mexicans. So there is this sort of finding our identity and finding who we are. And it did identify with what Raj was saying as far as like even growing up in spaces where you weren't really a majority. And I think I can resonate with that, where you walk into a room and you're the only one of Indian descent, and you kind of know it. And it's really, you're navigating white spaces, you're navigating black spaces, you're navigating other spaces. And with that said, you're always kind of molding yourself to fit the space. And there's a beauty in that, and then there's a flip side where you lose some of like who you are. And I think for me, my spiritual journey over the past, I would say, really like 2 years, has been really rediscovering what it is that makes us beautiful, and what it is that we can add to the climate of America. I'm just really proud of like what Raj is doing, and really continuing on in that spirit.
Well, let me put this in the form of a question based on conversations you and I had last night, Pardeep. I mean, part of the implication of what Pardeep's saying, it's a difficult question to answer. And as a gay man, I face this. As people of color, I think other leaders face this. In order to be a politician, in order to get elected by the general electorate, you sometimes have to make compromises. There's an assimilationist aspect to a certain extent of who you are. I mean, Pardeep, that was part of what you were getting at last night, right?
Yeah, it is.
So how do you walk that line? How are you true to who you are, what your roots are, but also how do you reach a wider audience?
So there's a flip side to that, I guess. And this is something that has only dawned on me as I've gotten older. I'm 42 now. I've got 3 kids. So I've been taught humility repeatedly, certainly for the last 10 years, but for much longer than that. But I think you can look at it as if it's a constant process of assimilation, or you can look at it a different way, which is how I choose to look at it and what feels comfortable to me, true to me. I've grown very comfortable with the person that I am, and the beliefs that I have, and what I have tried very hard to do is to learn to be very comfortable with other people as they are. Learn to be accepting of other people as they are, whether they agree with me or disagree with me. And my goal when I'm interacting with someone or building a coalition or trying to get something accomplished is not so much to change to fit the circumstance or to change that other person, but to really focus on finding a common understanding, focus on finding a common thread that can help tie both of our objectives together.
Yeah.
And that has been something that's I think it goes right back to my own upbringing. It goes back to later on in life. My oldest daughter, she's 10 years old. She was diagnosed with Down syndrome at birth. Big surprise to my wife and I, and changed in many ways our outlook, or at least changed is maybe the wrong word, but it really put a point on our belief that we as human beings, we live here for a finite period. Mm-hmm. And boy, it's a heck of a lot more fun and more fulfilling if we do our best to accept others as they are and accept what they have to offer and try and use that to some productive end instead of fighting against it in one way or another.
When I attended the one of the first mayoral debates at the library, I guess what you really impressed upon me was the importance of invoking a personal story like that, because you were answering a question about police community relations, and you immediately tied in to your daughter. I think you made the observation that probably more than anyone sitting in that room, your daughter, as a young woman of color with a disability, was probably more at risk in her relations with the police force. And
more dependent on the police force.
Yeah.
There are 2 truths in that story, right? And they both lead to 2 feelings that I have. And one is that I deeply, deeply respect the very difficult work that police do every day. They're called upon to manage situations that are complex, that are dangerous, and that very few of us ever have to manage in a day. But they also have a unique responsibility in our role, in their role in our world. And my daughter's experience as a child with a disability, as a child of color, is something that informs my kind of outlook on it. I absolutely believe that we should be supportive of the good work that police do in our society, and I absolutely believe that police should be held to the absolute highest standard. And I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a sign of respect.
All right. We did have a caller on the line who I think is calling back now. I'm going to just see if we can be spontaneous and get that person on the air. What I need you to do is to call back. Just relating to your daughter's story, I think I shared with you an interview that I'd done a few years ago. You've probably been too busy to listen to it, but he was with a young man named Jonathan Mooney. He had ADHD, dyslexia, couldn't read until he was 13. Eventually got a degree in English Lit from Brown University, kind of transcended that, but then he went back on a trip on a short bus. This bus that special ed kids sometimes travel has this huge stigma, and he learned so much from the preteens and the teenagers he talked to all over the country. I did a show about this, and a good friend of mine named Selwyn Sway, who, like you, comes from an immigrant family, in this case from Burma, and he talked about the gifts that having a child who has a different viewpoint, a different way of looking at the world, a cognitive difference means. Could you reflect on that just a bit?
Mm-hmm. Everybody has different gifts that they offer, right? Among those that have been, among the things that has been unique in my experience with my daughter is her, out of necessity and out of just desire, I guess, is she has taught me what it means to be patient. She has taught me what it means to be open to others. And she has taught me what it means to be persistent and courageous. She has a host of challenges that she navigates every day. She works harder to walk upstairs than I do. And her lesson to me is that
phone system? Can I give you
the
a cell
idea
phone?
of what
Great
is
calls.
possible and impossible is very often much more a figment of our own limitations than something real. And I'm very proud to be able to learn from her every day because of it.
And let's come back again to I think, one of the things that I hear there is as people grapple with who to support and what your different qualifications are, they're saying sustainability is important, environment is important, but how does that relate to the job of doing the mayor? Again, I think you've already made a good case about how it interrelates and how essentially issues of urban environmentalism really are central to what Madison's facing. But could you elaborate on that for that person who's just saying, who is this guy? River Alliance, what does that possibly have to do with being mayor?
Well, River Alliance doesn't necessarily have a direct line to mayor, but the environment absolutely does. And let me put it this way. We live in a beautiful city with relatively clean air, though it could be better, and water that is on every postcard you see of Madison. It is one of the things that brings business here. It's one of the things that brings tourists here. It's one of the things that brought my family to this part of the world. To pretend that the environment is some sort of ancillary issue and not directly tied to our economic success is a really, really big mistake. And as this world warms, as cities on the eastern seaboard that right now play host to more than a few corporate headquarters, as they are undergoing major changes in the climate, flooding that's wiping out cities, as cities on the western side of the country are dealing with things like forest fires, companies and talent, employees are going to be looking for relatively stable places to locate. Mm-hmm. Madison is one of those places. And we have a host of natural attributes that are going to attract those employers and that talent. We have to guard those attributes fiercely for the sake of our economy, not just our health, which is true, not just our quality of life, which is true, but our economy rests on us making sure that our natural world here in Madison is protected and the resources that we have here are protected.
We have a caller who has been very kind and persistent in trying to get through. Are you there, caller?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Thank you for your persistence. And our very persistent caller has been kind enough to keep on trying to get through. What is your comment or question for our guest, Raj Shukla?
Hi, Raj. This is Nikki Vanderbilt from the Madison School Board.
Hi, Nikki.
I wanted to thank you for running and for making inclusion a major part of your platform.
My pleasure. And I think that it is folks like you on the school board who inspired me to jump into this race and have fueled my commitment to social equity in all its forms. Thank you.
Nikki, can you just relate? We discussed this with two other candidates yesterday. And I think there are some good connections that have been made between the folks on the school board and the Madison schools and the city of Madison. But I've seen like other cities in which there is a more proactive approach on everything from fair housing to the welfare of our youth to just how education impacts on economic aspects of our life. Anyway, do you see with someone like Raj potential for building some new bridges in those directions?
Absolutely. He has the ability to bring people together. I'm currently on the City Education Committee as well, which deals with the mayor, the city, the county, and the school board. And we've been looking for ways to branch out, to work to try and create a cohesive unit to make sure that education is open for everyone. But the school board can't do it alone. It needs help, we need partners, and we need people who are willing to reach out. And I think Raj has done that very well.
Just in general, why do you feel it's time for a change? We have a very experienced mayor. We saw this summer where that expertise comes into play in a situation like the flooding that was going on. There's an uphill struggle for folks who are new because you have a mayor who's that experienced. But conversely, he's been in there for 22 years of the last, years since 1973 when he first ran. There are folks who are advocating for change. Why is that change important to you?
Change is important to me because without change, you don't grow. You need to be able to expand your horizons. Experience is important, but you have to be able to be willing to go out on a limb. You have to be willing to reach new bases and new people. This is nothing against Mayor Soglin, but we need an approach that's more modern. Additionally, I like, as far as the flooding issues, Raj has the environmental experience. I think that he could handle that quite nicely.
And can I just jump in here?
Yeah, absolutely.
The flooding that happened in August was devastating, absolutely, but it was not unforeseen. And I will give you an example. I was sitting in the council chambers February of 2015, and a group of scientists were talking to the Common Council. I'm not sure if the mayor was there. I'm not sure if any of my opponents were there that day. Talking to members of the Common Council about the impacts of climate change. And they described what would happen if a large amount of rain fell in 24 hours over the city of Madison. And it described quite precisely exactly what we ended up seeing.
Yeah.
Large portions of the east side of Madison flooded, large portions of the west side devastated. Lake levels and the dangers of flooding only became an issue.
Yep.
Only became an issue when the mayor's gubernatorial race ended and he decided he wanted to run for mayor again. So, I appreciate the city staff and the county staff that work diligently to protect our city. I would expect nothing less from folks who are dedicated professionals and who care deeply about this place. What I do not appreciate is that one of the first comments after the flooding that the mayor made was to point a finger at the county executive as if to blame him for climate change. For 15 inches of rain falling on our city. And this is one of the big differences that I hope to offer in this race. I offer a fresh perspective, absolutely, and I offer a new way of doing business, one that is proactive in building relationships with county level leaders, with other municipalities, with others in the state that we are going to need to make progress on some key issues. Transportation is certainly one of them. Climate change is another, and flooding, water quality. I think the community is tired of a kind of leadership that rests on denying responsibility, deflecting responsibility, or pointing fingers at others when something goes wrong. And that is something that I think that we all could use a change with.
You know, there's this essential conundrum, and I think we should get right at, because the issue of Paul Soglin and whether any purpose is served in him continuing in that role. That is central to this race. Now, people are saying the last time he ran, he got 73% of the vote relative to Scott Resnick. Well, that was Scott's first try, and I think people have to recognize the power of the incumbency. When you've been in that long, you have the lists, you have the information, you have the contacts, you have people who are deeply invested in you. I mean, so you guys are doing something amazing this time in terms of the credibility that's come with your fundraising, with your work out in the community, hitting doors and doing other things. It's not easy to come up against an incumbent. And, you know, as Nikki was alluding to, I mean, this is somebody that is deserving of our respect. When I read a book called Voices of Conscience and Courage, Paul Soglin's story is going to be there. On the other hand, not so much lately. His statements on homelessness have been incendiary. And the common count, the city, the mayor's office has not been, to use a metaphor that's apt for you, a river anymore. The river of the community doesn't flow through it. It's really hard to get his attention. In fact, some of us have been placed on an enemies list because we've said things that are unpopular or threatening to him. And that is not a good course of events. That is something that invites change.
Given the nature of our world, I mean, I think there was a time, maybe reaching back to the 70s, where Madison and our leadership could focus very tightly on the boundaries of the city and just focus on what's inside our borders, and we would do just fine. But we live in increasingly an economy that is regional and that is global. Our transportation system needs to be regional. Our water quality issues are handled at a regional level. Our healthcare systems are regional. Our telecom systems are regional. We actually need a mayor that can look beyond our borders, build solid working relationships with others who don't always agree with him, and make progress that way. Let me give you an example.
Please.
We have a real need for something called a regional transit authority. This is a mechanism that communities all over the country use to get different jurisdictions, different cities and different counties to have a structure where you can make decisions together and where you can raise money
Take
together.
Chicago or the Twin Cities as a case in point.
Exactly. Happens all over the country. The state has forbidden that in Wisconsin. I actually used to work on this in Milwaukee. We were trying to get that done there as well. And the business community's behind it. Great sections of the community are behind it. Local leaders are behind it. But you still got to flip some Republican votes in suburban districts or exurban districts in order to get this to happen.
Yeah.
Does anyone here believe that this mayor is going to build a coalition across the state to help people who disagree with him to move in the direction that we want? Well, I don't believe that's true, and I don't know that Democrats thought that was true last summer when he was running for governor.
Or when he ran for Congress in 1994. That was an impediment, that he didn't have a history of working with neighboring governments or the county government. I just want to focus in for just a second. The fact that he and Joe Parisi or some of the other past county executives that he had a chance to work with over the years did not get along with him. You know, on the basic issues, on ideology, they were in the same place, but there's a difficult, contrary personality that prevented that from happening.
And I understand the natural tensions that arise when different jurisdictions with different funding streams and different authorities kind of rub against each other. But there is something to be said about persistent, uncompromising focus on working together. Finding a way to work together, especially when the problems that we are facing are shared and that the solutions will only happen by collaborating. you have to have leadership that puts that above everything else, whether it's your future political objectives or your past, your scars from political battles of the past.
Just your thoughts on how he bowed out of the race and then entered back into it. What kind of message did that send?
It's I don't know what message it sent to others. I guess from my perspective, I'm not at all surprised that he decided, having been unsuccessful in his race for governor, that he wanted to keep his job.
All right. We got about 18 minutes left, so let's try to punctuate some of the policy positions that you have. You were alluding to transportation. You have a proposal out there to make transportation free and accessible to everyone. Now, Toriana, who was on yesterday, questioned that from a budgetary standpoint. She said maybe down the road that's a possibility, but it's a long way down the road.
Yeah, you could say that about extending transit in any way, shape, or form right now. You could say that about creating bus rapid transit. It's a budgetary issue.
So what's broken with the current system, and how would you fix it?
There are kind of two issues here. First, our land is not used in a way that lends towards an efficient transit system. We're too spread out. People are too spread out. So we need to create land use policies that bring people closer together, that bring people closer to their jobs and closer to amenities, and make it easier to have an efficient transit system that moves people to their jobs, to daycare, whatever it is. The other side of it is we don't have the physical space in the community right now to house the number of buses that we need to extend service. That's a really fundamental physical barrier that we're dealing with. It's why we need to create a regional system, why we need to figure out how we can find more space and more options in terms of configuring a system so that it's more efficient for more people in the community. In order to do that, we will need to find new funding streams for every single part of what we're discussing on the transit front. So to say that Toriana's critique, I think you could apply that to pretty much any issue that any of us are going to be facing. It is a matter of priorities. What are you going to prioritize doing? What I will prioritize doing is building a regional coalition so that we can actually have a system that can pay for the system that we need.
We're sitting here in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, and the folks here aren't going to be voting for you. But they have a stake in who the city of Madison mayor is. And, one of those things, frankly, is, the city of Madison and Sun Prairie have grown together in a way, so it's very much like the relationship between Madison and Middleton or Fitchburg. And yet there is no regional transit authority that provides a way that someone who commutes from Sun Prairie into Madison can get there. Is that the kind of thing that we could get at, too, thinking more regionally?
We have to. And the only way you do that is working together with surrounding leaders and supporting these efforts at a statewide level. And so that means surrounding leaders right here in Dane County, but we have to work with leaders in Appleton, and we have to work with leaders in Robin Voss's district, and we have to work with leaders in Wausau and Rhinelander and Eau Claire, and build a coalition of folks. Now, the question before voters in Madison is who's best positioned to actually do that work? And I would put forward that my professional record, my record as a civic leader, all lends toward a person that's able to bring people together around difficult issues.
And I'm gathering, as you mentioned, these cities, several of which I've lived in because I grew up all over Wisconsin. You have a statewide vision, and very often we can be very parochial about thinking only about Madison and Dane County and not how it relates to the rest of the state. So is that indeed part of what you have to offer?
We are affected by others in the state, and we affect others in the state. We are driving the state's economy right here in Dane County. And we are affected by the political decisions made by leaders in other parts of the state. It makes zero sense to not engage a wider pool of people. That doesn't mean that we don't focus on making sure that the streets are plowed and that trash is picked up and that all of the things that we need to have a good quality of life in Madison aren't dealt with. But as a political leader, your responsibilities extend beyond simple management of a unit of government. That's part of it.
Okay.
You also have to articulate a bigger vision and reach for what we need to make sure that we're successful in the future. And what we need is a regional approach to our economy, a regional approach to our transit system.
I want to return to a couple of aspects of your biography that may relate to some of this. You were born in Dodge City, Kansas. My parents, my middle name is Lawrence, after Lawrence, Kansas. My granddad was from there. My parents lived in Wichita for 30 years. I know Dodge City well. Dodge City is the only city right now in Kansas that is majority minority by virtue of the migrant workers who live there. And so that has changed the landscape. In fact, the Republican administration has moved all the polling places outside of Dodge City, so Dodge City people can't vote.
I know.
Your experience, thinking back to the summer, the incursions of ICE, why are immigrant rights an important issue to bring into an issue of who's the best mayor of Madison?
Well, they're important certainly in us as a community demonstrating that we are a place that is for everyone, that we are a place that will not simply allow the federal government to terrorize people in our community. One of the things that the city can do as a function of its is support legal services for folks that are threatened by agencies like ICE. The other thing that we can do is help our community understand the threats that some of our neighbors are experiencing and help our community protect them in whatever way that we can. But among the biggest roles that a mayor can play and that a city government can play is demonstrate every day that we are a welcoming community, that we will not sacrifice our neighbors for whatever short-term political gain we might get out of Washington.
So when you were a few months old, your family moved to New Berlin, suburban Milwaukee, which is where you grew up. You ended up coming to school here at the University of Wisconsin, but you returned to Milwaukee for a time. I alluded to this earlier.
Yeah.
These are two cities with two very different cultures and ways of viewing the world in some ways, although we have far more in common, I think, than we sometimes allow to be brought into the discussion. But anyway, could you just discuss briefly your community organizing, other activities in Milwaukee, and then how that informs what we could be doing here in Madison?
I mean, it's a common thread, I guess, in my career and in my life. I joined an AmeriCorps program in Milwaukee called Public Allies. Michelle Obama actually started the Chicago office of this organization. So, and she writes about it in her book, in her most recent book. Yeah, you should take a look. It's an organization that brings people from the ages of 18 to 30 together from a wide range of backgrounds to work on community issues together. I did a couple things there. I worked at a nonprofit on an inner-city reinvestment project. It was designed to drive private investment to the most impoverished zip codes in Milwaukee. The idea being we could bring jobs to new areas and help reduce the stress on the social service network and actually build the skills and capacity of people that are living there. And then the other part of that role was to work in teams with other folks in this program to work on community issues. What we did was worked on an asset mapping project in Milwaukee, finding those jewels in the community that were centers for community, that were places where people shared information or found support from one another. Places that aren't always thought of by city planners, a barbershop where everyone got together and talked, or a church basement where people congregated.
As an oral historian, barbershops are really central.
It's really
to
important.
Where you find out those
super,
things.
super important.
Yeah.
Among the things that I learned there, and it's a common thread, is just the power of community, the power of bringing diverse voices together to work on shared values. It is not without struggle, and it isn't without some frustration sometimes as people work through their differences and find a path together. But the payoff is immense. It's a stronger fabric of community and a stronger sense of purpose amongst a range of different people that you can build with.
One of the things you need to do as a mayoral candidate is to address the full diversity of people that you'll be serving, but some of that has a geographical aspect to it. I'm holding in my hand a copy of the North Side News and looking at the Q&A that you and the other candidates did. Satya, who's going to be coming on in just a moment, has been very active on that side of town because she was an alder there.
Yeah, I used to live there too.
And oh, did you? Okay, so in Northside Planning Council, she was active in. I don't know if you were involved with NPC, but you know Alba Tucker by chance, who's the director?
I actually went to school with her.
Okay, I was her housemate for many years. So, but
I don't know that she'd remember me, but I remember her.
I bet you she would. But anyway, I think of all the Q&As I've seen, I think this is maybe one of the best ones to bring out that aspect of things. And so we talked about transportation, which is the third issue that you talked about. Again, we've got about 8 minutes left, but let's dive in a bit into affordable housing and community input. But affordable housing, what is your plan to change the status quo? Not just homelessness, which is obviously a very important aspect of it, but affordable housing and the dangers that come with gentrification.
Mm-hmm. There are a few different angles to affordable housing. There are young families that are trying to move into the community and can't afford to find a place that fits them. There are older folks who have been in the community for 30 years and are seeing their property taxes increase and don't know what to do.
And many of them were forced out of houses they've been in for years.
And it's a lot harder to just up and move to Cross Plains when you're in your 70s and dealing with life as it is then. The approach that their approaches are various that we have to take to try and get at this, but none of the approaches will be successful without simply expanding the pool of housing available to folks. We have to find ways, either in the zoning codes or other ways, to make sure that more people can live in more places across the community. And so one of the things that I look to is guidance that the Obama administration provided as he was leaving his office. So I think it was November of 2016 that his report came out offering guidance to cities to deal with affordable housing issues. And one of the recommendations is to modernize your zoning codes and eliminate exclusionary zoning to whatever extent you can, which is another way of saying single-family zoning or single-purpose zoning. Cities like Minneapolis have approached this by eliminating single-family zoning in large parts of the city. Grand Rapids has done a modified version of that. The state of Oregon, I believe, has completely gotten rid of
Just because we're short on time, just one thing I'd like you to talk about in the context. So you came from Milwaukee, which is the most segregated city in the country by some measures. Madison has a version of that, but it's more balkanized. When Barbara McKinney was out campaigning, she would be at $1.5 million house and then 5 minutes later be in subsidized housing.
Well, you see the same thing on North Avenue in Milwaukee.
Yeah. But anyway, how do we develop a city where people of great means also have understanding and relationship with people who don't have much?
Part of it is exactly what I'm talking about. On my street, one side of it is single-family
So
homes.
what side of town are you in?
Yeah, I'm on the near west side.
Okay.
Kendall Avenue. One side of the street is single-family homes. The other side of the street are 4 units and duplexes.
Yep.
And we need to find more ways for more 4 units and duplexes and tri-units to be introduced into what were formerly single-family neighborhoods. Now, we can't just do that like that. There has to be a robust conversation with neighborhood associations and with the community at large. But one thing that we have to find a way to agree on, and I think that this is true in our city, but we have to formalize our commitment to increasing density in our community, making sure that more people have a space in our community and there are more options for folks to live in.
Density isn't a bad word.
No, I mean, it's community. It's bringing people closer together. Now, there are certainly folks who have some fears with that and some concerns with that, and those are all valid, and we need to talk about it. But we have to commit to making a space for everyone in the city.
Community input. So again, making the mayor's office a place where everyone feels they have a voice, where you're listening. Just a couple of aspects of this. One thing I would plant, and you may be having a chance to think about this, but there is no facility like the one we're sitting in that has radio and television options for community members anymore. WYRU TV is gone. The city channel says that probably their 25th or 26th priority is to bring community voices in or to cover things other than the city council and the mayor's office. Would you advocate for some kind of a change, some kind of a way to give people that kind of a community center, community voices?
I'd love to think about it. I mean, this is one of those areas where, like, well, what's the budget, John? And we have to decide what our priorities are and then focus on them. I do think a real priority is bringing new voices, certainly, into government.
Yeah.
And I would like to formally add youth voices in particular into every city process. Right now, so many decisions are made in the city-county building that affect young people in particular, young people of color in particular, marginalized people in particular, and they don't have a voice right now.
So I'm going to throw you a softball question, but when we talked about that after the mayoral debate, those kids in communities, color disenfranchised communities are really important, but what stood out to me is nobody was talking about the LGBT kids, kind of assuming that they're okay now.
No. No.
So what do we need to do there?
Well, I mean, I don't think that it's a dramatically different approach than what we would do with any marginalized community. Actually invite folks in and actually give folks a seat at the table. And that does come, though, with city leaders like common council members and like the mayor actually offering agency to young people as they are grappling with some of these city decisions. So that's why it's really important that they have a presence, hopefully a voting presence, on some of these decisions that we're making.
So one of the things that Paul Soglin and many of his colleagues and predecessors who served in the mayor's office over the years have done really well is to have a neighborhood voice be expressed. But one aspect of that, and Paul, I think, developed this in the late 70s, traveling to the Twin Cities, is something called Metropolitan Planning Councils. So we have one now, Northside Planning Council. The Southside Planning Council, where I was executive director 5 to 7 years ago, also exists. The one in the central part of the city has kind of faded away. Ideally, if you're going to do this in a city like they do in St. Paul and Minneapolis, you have them in every corner of the city, and they become a voice. But is that potentially part of the solution?
Potentially. I mean, like, I think that there are a lot of different models that we can use to and I think that they're going to have to change over time depending on...
But very specifically, how do you see a city that has vibrant neighborhood community groups? How do you see connecting with those people and bringing them into the life of the community?
I think it first begins with maybe where we had part of this conversation. It begins with a very clear demonstration by the chief executive of the city and the leadership of the city that you're actually going to listen to other people if they disagree with you.
All right.
And that is not what we have right now, and that is what will change if I'm elected.
So I hate to do this after modeling something different, but you got about 30 seconds. Can you make the last pitch? Why should people support Raj Shukla for mayor? And what is your website? How do they find out more?
Yeah, it's rajshukla.com, rajshukla.com. Go to our green growth agenda for specifics on what we'd like to do. My 30 seconds is I am a seasoned executive, one of two executives in this race, who knows how to make difficult decisions and who knows how to bring people together. And, I think that the mayor has done an admirable job over the 9 terms that he has served, or the 8 terms that he has served. But I think we're at a moment right now where we need fresh ideas, new leadership, and a new attitude in city government, and I can provide it.
Raj, thank you so much.
Thank
it's been
you,
great
John.
being in conversation with you. Do you mind showing our next guest in?
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. Again, this is Community Conversations here on WSLP, the Sun, out of Sun Prairie in the Media Center. And as you all know, yesterday we were in conversation with Maurice Cheeks and then Toriana Pettaway. And then just now with Raj Shukla, and just in a moment with Satya Rhodes Conway. The folks here at the Sun Prairie Media Center have been kind enough to host this series of discussions with candidates for Madison mayor.